Snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes over the vast expanse of Hawthorne estate, softening its stone edges yet sharpening the loneliness of the figure who stepped out of the hired carriage. The young gentlewoman, thinly dressed in a travel-worn blue gown, paused on the gravel as the horse's breath steamed into the air. For a moment she simply stared at the mansion's windows, ablaze with candlelight and Christmas cheer. Inside, laughter rose faintly, the warm hum of a noble house preparing for its celebratory supper. Yet not a single servant had been sent to greet her, no steward to acknowledge her arrival as the new duchess. She drew her shawl tighter around her shoulders, hunger coiling in her stomach, and felt the bitter truth settle. She had been expected yet deliberately ignored. Her boots sank into the wet snow as she approached the great door. She lifted her hand to knock, though her fingers trembled with cold. When the brass knocker fell, its echo rang through the night but brought no immediate answer. Instead, the door opened only after a long wait, revealing a stern maid who looked her over with an expression that hovered between disdain and pity. Without a word, she was ushered into the entrance hall, grand, echoing, and filled with the scent of roasted goose and mulled wine. The warmth of the interior brushed her cheeks, but its welcome was an illusion. Eyes watched her from the upper landing, two figures descending with the grace of those accustomed to being obeyed. The Dowager Duchess, draped in black silk as though mourning still gave her relevance, regarded the newcomer with a chilly detachment. Beside her stood her daughter, a woman with perfect curls and a smirk that suggested she had predicted, and delighted in, this exact moment. The stepsister's voice broke first, light but sharp. "So," she murmured, "this is the girl fathers will forced into our family. How quaint." The gentlewoman bowed her head politely, offering her name, but her words faltered beneath the dowager's icy stare. "You will not address me directly unless I request it," the older woman said, her tone low and commanding. "Your marriage to my stepson may be legal, but it does not make you mistress of Hawthorne House. That title is earned, not acquired through desperation." The insult struck with quiet brutality, and though the young bride held her posture, a faint flush touched her cheeks. She attempted to explain that the roads had been treacherous, that her carriage had been delayed, and that she had not eaten since morning, but the dowager waved away her words. "Your conditions are not our concern," she said. "I trust you are accustomed to discomfort." A footman was summoned, not to lead her to the guest chambers prepared for the Duke's wife, but rather to escort her toward the servants' wing, a narrow corridor lit only by a single sconce. The stepsister followed behind just long enough to deliver one final strike. "Do not imagine," she whispered, "that you will be welcomed at tomorrow's celebrations. You were chosen for convenience, nothing more. And convenience does not dine with nobility." Her eyes glowed with satisfaction as she turned away, her laughter echoing faintly through the stone passageway. The footman, sympathetic but obedient, left her near the kitchen door with an apologetic glance. She stepped inside to find the room dim, the hearth burning down to embers. The cooks had retired for the evening. The long tables had been cleared. A single heel of bread lay forgotten on a plate, too stale to tempt even the mice. Her hunger pulsed fiercely, but she did not reach for it. Instead, she lowered herself onto a wooden bench, her body weary from travel, humiliation, and cold. A draught slipped through a cracked window, and she wrapped her shawl around her again, though it did little against the bone-deep chill. She gazed into the dying fire as if it might explain the fate that had delivered her here, a practical marriage arranged by distant relations, a house governed by resentment, a future chained to duty. She had known when she signed her name to the marriage contract that she was stepping into a world far above her means. She had not known she would arrive as an unwelcome burden. Her eyelids grew heavy, each blink longer than the last. Hunger hollowed her. Exhaustion pulled her downward. At last, she surrendered to sleep, curling beside the warmest stone near the hearth. The estate above her throbbed with music and celebration. Guests toasted the season, unaware that the Duke's new bride slept unnoticed in the kitchen. Snow thickened against the windows. Midnight bells rang in the distance. And in the servants' wing, she drifted into a restless slumber, unaware that fate was already shifting. The crunch of carriage wheels over snow arrived like a distant drumbeat. The front gates opened. Horses snorted. Footsteps quickened through the main hall, whispers rising in surprise. The Duke had returned early. His boots echoed with commanding authority upon the tiled floor, steady, assured, bearing the weight of an English nobleman who had seen battlefields and triumphs and tragedies since last Christmas. Cloak still dusted with fresh snow, he scanned the hall, noticing at once the absence of anyone prepared to greet him. "What is this?" he murmured to the steward. "Where is my wife?" His voice held neither anger nor softness, only expectation. The steward stuttered, unable to produce an answer, and the Duke's brow furrowed. Without waiting for guidance, he moved down the corridor with long strides that carried an undercurrent of urgency. Guided more by instinct than knowledge, he found himself at the threshold of the dim kitchen. The room smelled of dying embers and cold iron. Then his gaze settled upon her. A small, weary figure curled beside the hearth, shawl slipping from her shoulder, face illuminated by flickering orange light. Ash dusted the hem of her gown. Her hands, clasped beneath her cheek, trembled even in sleep. For a moment he simply stood there, breath caught in his chest, struck by the quiet injustice of the sight. She stirred as if sensing the room shift around her. Kneeling beside her, he brushed away a stray lock of hair that had fallen across her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open, wide, startled, frightened. "My lord," she whispered, struggling upright. "Forgive me. I did not mean to." "Madam," he said gently, yet with unmistakable command, "you owe me no apology for resting near warmth. But I suspect there are apologies owed you by others." His gaze flicked across the empty kitchen before returning to her face. Weariness clung to her expression, but so did dignity. He offered his hand. She hesitated only a moment before placing hers in his, and he lifted her with a careful steadiness that implied both respect and indignation. "You must be chilled through," he said, removing his heavy military cloak and draping it around her shoulders. The wool engulfed her, carrying the scent of cold air and pine forests. Her breath caught with a quiet gasp she tried to hide. "No Duchess of Hawthorne," he continued, "shall be left hungry or cast aside. Not while I draw breath." She opened her mouth to speak, but words faltered beneath the weight of his sincerity. Something softened in his features, an understanding shaped by battlefields and lonely halls. Without further ceremony, he guided her out of the kitchen, the cloak trailing behind her like a veil as they moved into the candlelit corridor. Servants peeked around corners. The Dowager froze at the top of the stairs. The stepsister stiffened beside her, color draining from her face. The Duke looked up at them, quiet fury sharpening his eyes. "We will speak," he said, not loudly, but with a command that rippled through the hall. The Dowager lowered her gaze first. The stepsister fumbled her words. But the Duke did not linger for their excuses. He kept his bride close, steadying her as though anchoring her to a truth she had not yet believed. She was no servant, no burden, no forgotten stranger. She was Duchess by law, and, if he had anything to do with it, by honor as well. When they reached the grand staircase, he paused, turning toward her as the candlelight flickered across his expression. "You have my word," he said softly, "that this house shall not reject you again." His sincerity settled into her chest like warmth after a long frost. And as he led her upward, with the watching household stunned into silence, she realized this night, this strange, bitter, beautiful Christmas Eve, was not the end of her humiliation but the beginning of a story she had never dared imagine. Snow still clung to the Duke's cloak as he guided his bride through the dim corridor, each of his steps echoing with a quiet authority that unsettled every servant they passed. His hand rested lightly beneath her elbow, offering support without presumption, yet the gesture made her pulse flutter with a confusion she dared not voice. She kept her gaze lowered, aware of the stares following them, some astonished, some fearful, some openly spiteful. The Duke sensed it too. The faint tightening of his jaw betrayed a simmering disapproval that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with what he had discovered. He led her into a small withdrawing room lit by a single candelabrum. Shadows moved along the walls like hesitant spectators, and she hesitated at the threshold. "My lord, I do not wish to trouble you further," she murmured, but he turned toward her with an expression that stilled her words. "The trouble," he said quietly, "rests upon those who neglected you, not on the woman wronged." He gestured toward a cushioned chair by the fire. "Please, sit where there is warmth." She obeyed, the heavy cloak pooling around her like a mantle far too grand for her shivering frame. Her hands remained clasped upon her lap, not out of fear but the instinct of someone unused to gentleness. The Duke moved to the hearth and stoked the fire himself, a task no nobleman typically performed. Sparks flickered upward as he worked the iron poker with practiced strength. "I apologize," she began softly, "for being found as I was. I fear I have embarrassed you on your very return." He paused, turning his head to regard her with a slow, deliberate intensity. "Embarrassed me? No." He set the poker aside. "But I am angered, deeply, that you were forced into such a state your first night here." Her breath caught. Anger in a nobleman's voice usually meant danger, but his tone carried no threat toward her. Instead, it wrapped around her like a protective shield she did not know she deserved. "I assure you," she said, trying to steady herself, "I did not wish to be a burden." "You are not." The firmness of his reply settled into the room with the same weight as a decree. She lifted her eyes, seeing him fully now, broad-shouldered, travel-worn, handsome in a way shaped more by adversity than vanity. His dark hair was still damp with melted snow, and the lines around his eyes hinted at both fatigue and depth of thought. This was not a man accustomed to being disobeyed, yet he treated her as if her comfort were a matter of honor. Before she could respond, hurried footsteps approached. The Dowager Duchess entered without invitation, her expression arranged into a mask of false concern. "My son," she began, voice trembling just enough to seem plausible, "had I known your bride had arrived early, we would have prepared appropriate accommodations." The Duke's gaze darkened. "Is that so?" "Of course," she insisted, folding her hands. "The staff must have been confused." "Confused." His voice cut like a blade sharpened on silence. "Confused into leaving my wife unfed, cold, sleeping against a hearth like a neglected foundling." The Dowager faltered, her composure slipping for the first time that evening. He stepped closer, not aggressive but immovable. "You are mistress of this house only in my absence. Yet tonight, you allowed it to disgrace itself." Her daughter appeared in the doorway next, armed with a brittle smile. "We meant no harm, brother. A misunderstanding, surely." The stepsister's eyes flicked to the bride, filled with contempt thinly veiled behind performative innocence. "Enough," the Duke commanded, his tone low yet resonant. "There will be no further misunderstanding." He turned slightly, extending a hand toward his wife. "Stand with me." She rose, the cloak trailing behind her. The room seemed to hold its breath. He addressed the servants who had gathered at the edges. "Attend closely. Lady Hawthorne is Duchess of this estate by law, by marriage, and by my word. Any disrespect toward her will be regarded as disrespect toward me." His gaze landed on each face, one after another. "Am I understood?" Murmured affirmations filled the room. The Dowager stiffened, stepsister paling at the public declaration. The bride felt the shift, not triumph, for she had not sought victory, but the first fragile stir of belonging. The Duke had not merely defended her. He had restored what had been taken before she even entered the house, her dignity. When the servants dispersed, he turned back to her. "You have not eaten," he said gently. "Allow me to correct that." He gestured toward the small table near the window. "Bring supper," he ordered briskly, and within moments dishes appeared, warm bread, broth, roasted meat, and winter vegetables. The scent alone made her dizzy. He motioned for her to sit. She hesitated. "My lord, I cannot allow you to attend me in this manner." "You can," he replied softly, "for I choose to." His chair scraped lightly as he sat opposite her. "Eat what you can. The road has taken enough from you." She lifted the spoon with trembling fingers. The first taste, simple broth, felt like life returning to her body. She closed her eyes briefly, trying not to weep. He watched her silently, not with pity but with something steadier, something quietly attentive. When she finished, warmth having seeped back into her limbs, she folded her hands. "You show me kindness I had not expected," she said, meeting his gaze. "I feared my arrival would be more of an inconvenience to you than to anyone." He considered her words with a thoughtful heaviness. "Our marriage," he said, "was arranged by necessity. Yet necessity does not preclude respect or fairness." He paused. "I have no intention of binding you to a life of fear. Whatever society imagines of this union, you will not suffer for it." Her voice softened. "I thank you, my lord." His eyes lingered on her face, as if searching for the truth beneath her words. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "Why did you agree to this marriage?" His question was not accusatory. It carried the quiet curiosity of a man who wished to understand the woman fate had placed beside him. She inhaled slowly. "My family's circumstances were diminished. After my father's death, there was little left. The relatives who housed me made it clear I could not remain indefinitely." Her gaze dropped. A mail-order marriage offered dignity, though perhaps not comfort. He nodded once, slowly. "Then allow me to be very plain," he said. "You shall not be cast aside here, and you will never again sleep cold while bearing my name." The earnestness in his tone warmed her more than the fire. A soft knock interrupted them. A maid bowed. "Your Grace, the chamber for the Duchess has been prepared." The Dowager's disapproval flickered behind the maid's eyes, but the Duke ignored it. He rose, offering his arm. "Allow me to escort you." She placed her hand lightly upon his sleeve, expecting the walk to be brief and formal. But as they ascended the grand staircase, he slowed his pace, matching her cautious steps. Candlelight glowed upon marble walls, casting long shadows that rose and fell like breath. At her chamber door, he paused, not as a husband claiming rights, but as a man acknowledging boundaries. "If you require anything," he said, "send word immediately." She nodded, touched by his restraint. He studied her for a heartbeat longer. "Tomorrow," he added, "we shall speak further of what this home is to become, for both of us." The promise settled between them, gentle yet potent. "Good night, my lady." "Good night, my lord." He stepped back, and the door closed softly behind her. She leaned against it, heart steadying, thoughts swirling like snowflakes outside her window. The house had rejected her, but he had not. And though she did not yet understand the path before her, she sensed, faintly, steadily, that the Duke's word alone had changed everything. Yet beyond the corridor, unseen forces stirred. The Dowager and her daughter whispered plans. The staff carried conflicting loyalties. And the Duke, despite his resolve, bore secrets of his own. The night settled, but the story had only just begun. Frost rimmed the windows by morning, turning the glass into a pale, trembling canvas of winter light. When the new Duchess woke, the unfamiliar chamber greeted her with silence. Soft drapes, a small fire crackling in the grate, and the faint scent of pine woven into the linens. She sat up slowly, uncertain whether last night's events had been a dream. The Duke's protective fury, his gentle insistence, the warmth of his cloak draped over her trembling shoulders. The memory was too vivid to dismiss. Still, she hesitated to believe a single evening could change the nature of a house that had so clearly wished to reject her. A soft knock sounded. The maid who entered seemed more respectful than fearful, though discomfort lingered in the set of her shoulders. "Your Grace," she murmured, "the Duke requests your presence in the East Garden. He said the morning air would do you good." The Duchess felt a flutter of nerves. "Is it appropriate to meet him there?" "He insisted, my lady." The maid bowed and withdrew. Moments later, wrapped in a fresh woolen cloak, and still half convinced she was trespassing, she stepped into the corridor. Servants passed her with increased deference, though their glances revealed surprise. Word of the Duke's arrival and his defense of his bride had clearly spread. She kept her composure steady as she made her way toward the terrace, though uncertainty clung to her steps. Outside, the world glittered with frost. Branches hung heavy with white lacework, and the breath of cold morning wrapped every stone in shimmering stillness. The Duke stood near the balustrade, his posture straight, hands clasped loosely behind his back. He turned when he heard her approach, a faint but genuine warmth softening his features. "Good morning," he said. "I trust you rested better in a proper bed." "I did." "Thank you, my lord." You need not thank me for what should have been your due from the beginning." His words carried neither pride nor apology, only simple truth. She lowered her gaze to the frosted garden below. "I did not expect you to seek my company so early. Nor did I expect to find my bride sleeping beside a kitchen hearth," he replied. "We both face unexpected realities, it seems." A small, fragile smile touched her lips. He gestured for her to walk with him. They descended the terrace steps, boots crunching on the brittle frost. Silence settled between them, a silence not tense but searching. He matched her pace, though his strides were naturally longer. It was she who finally spoke. "You must think me terribly weak for last night's state." "I think you terribly mistreated," he corrected. "And I think this house has forgotten what honor means." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "And you, my lord? Have you forgotten it too?" He stopped. The air between them tightened like a drawn bowstring. "I have spent years in battlefields," he said slowly, "where survival demanded difficult choices. But honor, true honor, I have tried not to forsake." His gaze moved to her face. "I cannot change the arrangement that brought us together. But I can decide what manner of husband I shall be." The sincerity of his confession tugged at something inside her chest, something she had long taught herself to quiet. "Then perhaps," she whispered, "we might learn what this marriage is meant to become." A gust of wind swept through the garden, shaking frost from the branches above. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small lantern, its brass frame dented, its glass scratched. He held it out to her with a curious solemnity. "This," he said, "has traveled with me through every campaign. It stayed lit on nights when the cold threatened to silence us, when darkness seemed endless." He offered it carefully, as though giving away a piece of his past. "I wish you to have it." She took it hesitantly, the metal chilled against her palms. "But why?" "Because," he said, "light should not be carried by one alone. And because you walked into this house with no one to defend you." His voice deepened. "Let this be a symbol that you are no longer alone." She stared at the lantern, touched not only by the gift but by the vulnerability he had revealed in offering it. No trinket from a wealthy estate could compare to this, an object shaped by hardship, warmed by memory, entrusted only to someone he deemed worthy. Before she could speak, hurried footsteps disrupted the quiet. A breathless footman bowed stiffly. "Your Grace, the Dowager requests your presence in the blue salon. She wishes to discuss preparations for the Christmas gathering." The Duke's expression hardened. The Duchess felt a shudder of dread. She had heard whispers from the servants, a gathering planned with the intention of humiliating her. The Dowager had not been softened by her son's return. She had merely been silenced for one night. Now she intended to reclaim her influence. The Duke dismissed the footman. "She will wait," he said sharply. "My lord," the Duchess murmured, "perhaps it is better I go. Refusing her summons so soon may cause more resentment." "Her resentment is not your burden. But her power over this household is." He studied her face, recognizing the careful logic beneath her gentle tone. She was not conceding out of fear but out of strategy. "Very well," he said. "But you will not face her alone." She shook her head lightly. "If I am to stand as Duchess, I must meet her on my own terms." His jaw tightened at the idea, but he did not argue. Instead, he reached for the lantern still in her hands. "Then take this with you," he said, closing her fingers around the handle. "If she means to darken your presence, let this be your reminder that shadows do not overpower a steady light." Emotion stirred in her throat, unexpected, fragile, overwhelming. "You honor me more than I deserve." "That is where you are mistaken," he replied softly. The footman lingered in the distance, waiting. She turned reluctantly toward the path back to the house. But before she took a single step, she felt the Duke's gaze upon her, protective and resolute. "Remember," he said, "you speak not only for yourself now, but as the Duchess of Hawthorne." She nodded. "I will try to be worthy of the name." "You already are." His words settled over her like warmth on the cold morning. She began walking toward the looming shape of the mansion, lantern held firmly, cloak brushing the frost-covered path. Behind her, the Duke watched with a quiet intensity that revealed more than words ever could. And though she had not yet faced the Dowager's next blow, something within her felt steadier, anchored by a truth she had only begun to understand. She was not stepping into a prison of cold judgment anymore. She was stepping into a battle she no longer had to fight alone. But the house, with all its silent corridors and hungry whispers, had not yet accepted defeat. And the Dowager Duchess had no intention of yielding her power without a cruel, calculated blow. The Duchess tightened her grip on the lantern. Whatever waited behind those doors, she would meet it with light. The blue salon had been transformed into a chamber of quiet hostility by the time the Duchess entered. Though the Christmas gathering would not begin for several hours, the Dowager had already positioned herself like a monarch upon a throne, hands folded primly, eyes gleaming with cold triumph. Nobles from neighboring estates, summoned early under the guise of holiday cheer, stood scattered across the room, murmuring behind gloved hands as the Duchess crossed the threshold. Their whispers prickled against her skin, yet she walked with measured grace, the Duke's lantern concealed beneath her cloak like a secret oath. The Dowager rose slowly. "My dear," she began, voice dripping with condescension, "we must discuss expectations for tonight. A duchess should know her place." Her expression softened falsely, inviting the room to witness her performance. "Given your background, it would be wise for you to observe from the edges. Speak little, smile modestly, and allow those with true breeding to guide the evening's tone." The Duchess inhaled, steadying the trembling that threatened her resolve. "I will conduct myself with dignity," she replied quietly, "as is my duty." The stepsister approached with a saccharine smile that did not reach her eyes. "Do not misunderstand," she whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "We only wish to spare you the discomfort of comparisons. The ladies attending tonight are of refined upbringing. It would be cruel to place you beside them and invite judgment." A ripple of soft laughter spread. The Duchess felt her cheeks heat, but she kept her chin lifted. Her voice steadied. "I am not here to compete with anyone." "Of course not," the Dowager said with triumphant finality. "You have nothing with which to compete." The Duchess opened her mouth, but the weight of the moment pressed too heavily on her chest. Behind her calm facade, she felt the return of that same aching loneliness from the night before. Her hand brushed the lantern beneath her cloak, fingertips grazing the cold brass. Its presence steadied her. If she spoke now, she would speak not only for herself but for the dignity the Duke had defended. But before she could muster the courage, the doors at the far end of the salon opened with a silent command. The Duke entered. The atmosphere shifted instantly. His gaze swept the room, pausing as he registered the arrangement. The nobles gathered, the Dowager poised like an executioner, the Duchess standing alone. A quiet fury glimmered in his eyes, controlled but unmistakable. The Dowager stepped forward, offering him a rehearsed smile. "My son, we were merely preparing your bride for this evening's demands." "You were belittling her," he replied, his voice cold enough to crack glass. Murmurs rippled across the room. The Dowager's smile faltered. The Duke crossed the salon to stand beside his wife, positioning himself with unmistakable solidarity. "If any person in this house needs guidance on conduct," he said, "it is not my Duchess." The room fell silent but for the soft hiss of the fire. The Dowager's composure slipped. "You do not understand. She arrived unprepared, unpresentable. She arrived mistreated," he countered. "And you intended to humiliate her further tonight." His gaze hardened. "I will not permit it." A heavy pause settled. Then, to the Duchess's astonishment, he extended his hand, not in command, but in a gesture of affirmation. "Come," he said softly. She placed her hand in his, and he guided her toward the center of the room. Though her heart pounded, she felt his presence like a shield. He turned to address the assembled nobles. "I wish to make something plain." His voice carried the resonance of authority earned through far more than title. "This woman is not a burden placed upon this house. She is its Duchess. She holds her position not by accident nor charity, but by right. And by my choosing." The words landed with the impact of a hammer. Several ladies gasped quietly. A few gentlemen exchanged quick looks of discomfort. But none challenged him. The Duke continued, his tone deepening. Any insult toward her is an insult toward me, and any attempt to diminish her shall be remembered. The Dowager bristled. You presume too much authority over this estate. I hold precisely the authority my title grants, he replied, and I choose to use it now. He reached for her hand once more and did something shocking, even theatrical in its significance. Sliding his signet ring from his own finger, he placed it gently upon hers. The room seemed to tremble with collective realization. The ring bore the seal of Hawthorne lineage. Placing it upon her hand was not merely symbolic. It was a declaration of allegiance and legitimacy that no faction could contest. A low murmur broke through the assembled guests. Astonishment, approval, resentment, all mixing like winter wind against stained glass. The Duchess felt breathless. "My lord," she whispered, unable to form anything more. He lowered his head slightly, meeting her gaze with quiet assurance. "You deserve to stand without fear." Strength filled her like warmth from a newly stoked fire. She turned toward the nobles who had whispered. Her voice, though soft, carried. "I seek no throne within this house. Only a place where I may serve with respect. If that is too much to ask, then perhaps the fault is not mine." Her words, gentle as snowfall, struck with the weight of truth. Several guests lowered their gazes in shame. The Dowager opened her mouth to retort, but the shift in the room was irreversible. Her influence had cracked. The Duke placed a steadying hand at the Duchess's back. "Come," he murmured. "There is nothing more to be said here." They left the salon together, the fire behind them flickering like a defeated crown. Once outside, snow had begun to fall. Soft, drifting flakes that kissed the stone steps and softened the bitter air. The Duke escorted her down toward the garden, where lanterns had been lit for the evening's festivities. The glow shimmered over the snow, casting golden halos that danced in the cold air. Her breath clouded before her, mingling with his. "I did not mean to cause conflict," she said quietly. "You did not," he answered. "My household did." He paused, then looked at her with a tenderness she had not yet seen so clearly. "You showed more grace than any demanded of you. More than they deserved." She lowered her gaze. "I only spoke what I felt." "That," he said, "is precisely why they feared you." She blinked up at him, startled. "Strength whispered is more powerful than strength shouted," he added. "And you have mastered the former without realizing." Snowflakes caught in her hair, melting like tiny stars. The Duke brushed one gently from her cheek, his touch hesitant but warm. "This marriage began in necessity," he murmured. "But I would have it continue in trust." Her heart tightened, not in fear, but in something deeper, something luminous. "I would try," she whispered, "if you would guide me." He shook his head slightly. "No. We will guide each other." The lanterns flickered. Snow fell in silver spirals. The estate behind them glowed with firelight, no longer a fortress but a home beginning to thaw. He offered his arm. She took it. And together, beneath the drifting snow and golden lights of Christmas Eve, they walked toward a life neither had expected. One built not on arrangement, but on a quiet, growing devotion that promised the hope of a future shaped by courage, dignity, and the slow, steady warmth of love.